that. We are joined today by Molly Peabody, who is the middle years program coordinator at the high school. It's 50% of her job there. So that would be 9th and 10th grades. I have a 10th grader, so like you all, this is my first time through this project. My understanding is that this personal project is just part of the IB program. It's existed as part of that since IB was started in Shaker. And so with that, given that we'll answer your questions certainly as we go. With that, I'll turn it over to Molly to introduce herself and to introduce this project. So thank you for being with us today, Molly.
Sure, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Peabody. I am currently sitting at the high school in office room 110. I am 50% IB coordinator, which is curriculum support for grades 9th and 10th. I push into collaborative planning time meetings with teachers. I work with department chairs. I work with the building administration for building-led initiatives. And that is the coordinator role. For those of you who are new to IB, Shaker is a pre-K through 12 continuum district, one of only 8 in the country, actually. And so it is quite an honor. And I have worked for Shaker Schools my entire career, so far 10 years. And I began as a classroom teacher. I taught 9th grade honors Lang and Lit, which is English, and 12th grade, more of a intervention support Lang and Lit. I enjoyed both thoroughly. I thought my groove was 9 honors, and then I taught 12th grade, and I loved that almost more so. So been a little bit around the block. I did work at Woodbury as their coordinator for 1 year in an interim period while they were waiting for an official hire. And now, as recently as last year, I am the logistics coordinator for all things crew and flex block at the high school. Very loaded terms here for students, teachers, and I'm sure the community. Certainly a lot of room to grow, and there's been some systems put in place this year to improve what they were last year. So just like all of you, I'll await to see how things are rolling for those building-wide initiatives next year. So all that to say, today we are going to be reviewing the 10th grade personal project. The personal project is culminating of the middle years program, which began back in grade 5 at Woodbury. And just to kind of jog your memory, there is a similar kind of format and structure that was started in 4th grade for exhibition. For those who have been in Shaker and had students go through several grades here, 4th graders do the exhibition where they work on something pretty much year round with mentors, and then they present to the community. In the past, I think 3 years, the community project in grade 8 was taken off. Very similar structure. That is tied to a class, but every 8th grader completes the community project and then again has some kind of showcase. And the personal project is the next project. So it is, like I said, the culminating one within MYP. And it is a self-driven project that students can, sorry, I'm going to be multitasking and omitting a few as I can. Students can self-explore something that they've been wanting to learn more about. I always like to say it's an excuse for them to spend school time doing something they're passionate about. If you've heard of the personal project, I was going to do this, but reading the room with cameras off, that is quite all right. I will pivot away from this. My assumption would be that many of you have heard of it. And I'm here to kind of clear up some maybe discrepancies in the overall understanding or rollout, and or just make sure everyone's aware and on the same page of what it will look like this year. If you've had a Shaker student in the past go through grade 10, The personal project went on a bit of a hiatus during COVID for varying factors. And now it's back, and we're hoping this year it'll be the best yet. There have been changes put into place to make this an area of priority for not only the high school, but the district. And so whatever you knew about personal project in the past, my hope is that you can come in with a fresh perspective and begin anew. And I just saw someone's camera go on. If you have a question, Karen, I'm happy to answer it.
Sorry, I was just trying to say, I hold up my finger for number one that I don't know anything about the project. Sorry.
Thank you for participating. I so appreciate you. You'd be the student I would be looking to in virtual circles. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So, and that is completely fine. This session is to operate as if you've never heard of it. And for those who have, hopefully a review of some information may clear up some different rumors and so on. Okay. I am going to do my best to toggle between the chat so I can answer your questions in live time, and then go through the slides as well. Also, I don't mind at all if you would prefer to just unmute and ask a question. I don't mind. So please feel free if it feels like the right time and you want to be a risk taker, please unmute and ask your question. All right. So I did mention a little bit before, the personal project is a way for students to showcase their learning. So the middle years program, like I said, begins in grade 5, and there are a lot of similarities of what Woodbury did that the high school is doing now. One of those is the development of skills through our IB approaches to learning. And those are skills that all would agree that we would like students to graduate with, no matter their post-secondary plans. We're talking collaboration, self-management, research, critical thinking, and it really is, they're skills that we sometimes make assumptions that students know, but IB would say, where's the explicit teaching and connection to that skill development? That could look like something like, instead of a teacher saying, okay, get in your groups, it is simulating what working effectively with your peers may look like. The personal project is an opportunity for students to demonstrate their development of those skills. So because they've had the middle years program since 5th grade, they've had exposure to the ATLs, the approaches to learning, and now's their time to say, hey, here's what I've learned. And so that's kind of the general idea of what the project's purpose is to serve. And now we're going to talk a little bit about physically, what is it? I'll pause just naturally if there's any questions. Okay, so the personal project is made up of 3 components. There is the thinking, the doing, and the sharing. So the thinking is just your average process journal, kind of talking about the process of the entire project. We'll talk a little bit later about this will look a little bit different this year because your son or daughter in 10th grade will have support from teachers in multiple different avenues this year. But the process journal is documenting the physical skill development. So it's set up, and I'll show you a sample, but at the top, it's like, what did you do? What skill did this develop, and how? So again, making that an explicit connection, because we do stuff, and 10th graders do stuff all the time, not even knowing they are developing a skill. And so it does allow that time to reflect and say, okay, here's the skill that I developed when I did this task. The evidence is generally the product. For those who have had 10th graders in the past, this typically took the form of your traditional trifold board. Then COVID hit. Like I said, we went on a bit of a hiatus, but since bringing it back, we typically see that students create some kind of slide deck that shows pictures of their project or documents the process, which IB would argue is more important than the product. and overall just general reflection. And so I would say Google Slides, that kind of setting typically is what we see, and nothing is off limits. So I'll show you some examples here in a little bit, but sometimes a physical product is created. So if I were to take this journal that I have right here, that happens to be the whole teacher, and this was a student created journal, this could be the product. So one year a girl did bullet journaling, and her product was the physical journal where you could page through and see just her overall thought reflection. And it was something that she had been wanting to do, and she used personal project as the means in which she finally did it. The report is the overall sharing. This can take many forms, again, to make it as accessible as possible. It could be your typical typed report that you would see like in an English class, or it can be an audio recorded version. So I would say generally, just from sheer sake of kind of the programming that 10th graders may be used to, I would say the paper form gets turned in more frequently. And there's years that we have really stellar reports that come out through recorded version. The specifics of those we'll get to a little bit later, but I just wanted you to know these are the components. These are physically what is required for the project. Okay, so sticking with the skills in mind, this is an example of a process journal. So students in a Google Classroom receive a running document of what we call process journal entries. We are required to submit 8 to IB. So they choose their best, and this demonstrates kind of exactly what I was explaining. So they'll have their date, that they did something, what was done or learned, and what skill was developed. Most importantly, how was it developed? So just to kind of make some explicit connections for you. So the approaches to learning are the skills, same 5th grade through 12th grade. And the categories are research, self-management, thinking, and the communication piece. We are not going to watch this young man rock climb today. And I can say that his personal project was rock climbing a specific difficult route at Shaker Rocks. And so his physical product was proof of him achieving that goal. Now, IB, like I said before, is really more like, tell me about the process, less worried about the product. If this student was not successful in climbing the hard route up the wall, they wouldn't say, okay, that's going to impact your grade, right? They more so are saying, what skills did you develop throughout this process of trying to reach the goal that you've set for yourself? And so certainly the products, this is one example of forms that it could take, but there's no right or wrong. And the level of the level of achievement towards your goal does not impact how one is scored. So the report, this is the sharing piece. So we talked about how it could be typed and the traditional MLA that we're used to, I'm sure from even when we were in school, or an audio recording. There are explicit prompts that IB would like 10th graders to answer. And again, it pretty much is just talking about their experience. So process and the importance of it. So this template was something we created new last year. And it does allow students to see the typical MLA format. This is something that's pushed out through Google Classroom that they can make their own copy and fill out. It does explicitly state the paragraphs and what form they will have and different prompts associated. And there are different prompts, like I said, per paragraph that we'll see, I think, on one of the next slides. Just want to toggle to this quickly and then we can go back. The outline for the report, this was again new last year, and we're thinking hopefully ensuring that all students have equal access to be successful in this process. So ultimately what this document serves is the question on the left is populated by IB. These are the questions that they would prefer 10th graders answer throughout their report. We also broke them up by paragraph. And so from a left to right standpoint, if we know that the student has to answer what the personal project is, it is explicitly stated what it is in the overview slides that I happen to be showing you as we speak. And then we do have a sentence stem for students to fill out. And then literally this third column makes up the paragraph. Now, this is an example of one resource we have for students who need it. It is not required for students who don't need this level of guidance. They can simply just pull up the prompts and answer them in sentence format, and it's equally as satisfied. Again, for students who need the additional support, we have the supporting docs here for them, and just from the left to right, they are answering the prompts. And so you'll see it's spaced out by different paragraphs. And it looks a lot longer than it ends up being. I would say we've had very successful reports no longer than 2.5 pages, and we've had successful reports that are 6 to 7 pages. So again, it really depends on how the process went, how detailed the student gets in explaining that, what product might have been created, and so forth.
Hey, Molly, can I ask a few questions that have come up in the chat?
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, so one is, what class will this be a part of?
Okay, great question. So 2 years ago, we had a committee actually come up with a plan to push this into all core content area classes. So that's math, science, INS, which is, as you know, it's social studies, and Lang and Lit, which is English. I will say that based on just overall pacing of other content and curriculum, it was not something that we found successful, unfortunately. Hence the pivot. It will exist, and there's a whole slide designated to the when, and the majority will be that material is pushed out during the crew period, which is, for those who don't know, like the high school version of advisory. It happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays for 30 minutes each, and it's sectioned by grade level. So the purpose of crew is to kind of create a sense of belonging for our students and connect with students they may not see during their regular day with a teacher they may not see in their regular day. So the bell actually just rang and crew just dismissed, but it is a smaller group, and that is the physical time and place that the material will be shared. And then I have a meeting with our department chair for Lang and Lit tomorrow, actually, to talk about how they, how English teachers may pick up and support the report component, which is down the road, will happen late February or late January, early February. And so we're going to talk about that just overall to ensure that students have point people throughout. But that was a very long answer to say it's not currently tied to a class. It's tied to our advisory period.
So the obvious follow-on is there a grade to it? And if so, where does that grade get assigned? Or is it just pass fail, something they need to do before moving on? Or
right. So the grade component is teacher choice. And so that's one thing I'm talking to the chair about tomorrow is how can we motivate students to complete the report in that audio or written form? Can we include something in the grade book? Because we know our students are driven by points. And for those who aren't and are intrinsically motivated to do it anyway, they will receive a 0.25 independent study credit. That's awarded in a pass-fail model. So ultimately, students who complete the project pass, and they get that on their credit or on their transcript. What's really nice about that is it does, I always say, so my mom's in HR, so like she was always drilling the resume, what's on your resume, and going into education, short of babysitting and maybe running a camp, I was like, I don't even know how to build my resume. But one example I always tell the students is, this is resume content. This is something you talk about in an interview to say, this was completely self-exploratory. I set an area of inquiry that I was interested in, and I explored it over time. And here is how it turned out. And so that does work for some, and others, we continue to have conversations about how to motivate students to engage in the process. And I will say, just based from on experience, that the hardest part about the project is coming up with the idea. And we have a couple more slides associated to that piece. But if a student's like me, they want just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Sometimes the vague, like you can do anything, is really troubling for some students. And they're like, but just tell me what I need to do, right? And so the crew period is, we have prompts and ways that they can kind of tap into what their interests or hobbies are to think what they might do for the project. But once it's started, typically we found that students are able to complete the requirements relatively simply with the help of adults in different forms. But yeah, so I don't know if I answered that fully.
Okay, another question, and this is from Zoe, which is, when will it be shared in crew and when is it due? You have a slide on that later, correct?
I believe I do. So today, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but today the students had an initial interest questionnaire, which is in order to pair them with a supervisor, which I have a slide on. They are going to indicate what they're interested in. What are your hobbies? Is it a sport? Is it something that the school doesn't even offer? And what's something you might want to explore? I take that information and juxtapose it with a teacher survey and their responses, and pair teachers with students of like interests. So that teacher then serves as a supervisor. And so that happened today. So today's first exposure to the project happened within the last 30 minutes, where students received a very brief overview and said, given this overview, what are your interests? But from there, our official launch is not until November 9th. So if you're like, my 10th grader said nothing, that is completely to be expected. They wouldn't have the knowledge until literally within the next 30 or within the last 30 minutes. It will launch November 9th, and we're going a little back and forth right now on if we're going to make it due the Friday before spring break, which I think is like March 29th, or the Friday after spring break. There's pros and cons to both. But regardless, generally, it needs to be turned in by the second week of April at the latest. Yeah, Anne?
Molly, when will they be able to meet with this teacher that they're paired with?
So we proposed to the district, and I met with John Moore yesterday. For those who know him, he is our director of learning and teaching. We have proposed that the flex block time is used sacred to meet with their supervisors. And I felt really strongly about this because teachers, as all of you I'm sure can relate, are completely in the weeds with work. And it's a lot right now, and it's a lot to work right now. And so instead of piling on more and more, I was like, what can we take away to be successful in this? And so that was proposed. And so we're awaiting to hear.
That they would meet during flex block?
Yes.
But they're okay.
It's
this
okay.
is a bigger thing, but they're required to be at flex block for their other activities.
Right.
So you're taking away from that?
Not necessarily. So flex can be from 2 to 4. Required flexes right now are 2 to 3. And so there is some buffer room there. But ultimately, we're just trying to get, how do we have the most captive audience? And 10th graders are used to being here until 3 o'clock at least. So what that means as far as supervisor meetings, because there's only 4 total once a month, how can we ensure that they are staying? So stay tuned on that, Ann. Thank you. Rebecca?
One more question.
Yeah,
Is it
Molly, hi, thank you. So I guess I just need to know, is this a requirement for graduation? If they don't do it, will they not graduate?
There's no connection currently to graduation, and I would say it's an expectation within our building that students are completing it. Our IB evaluation last year, this was one matter to be addressed, as in the district has to figure out ways that students are completing it. Hence the few changes. It is still currently not tied to graduation though.
Okay, and so this idea of pass, no pass, the awarding of maybe 0.25 credits of independent study, there's really, what I guess I'm understanding is there's no way to enforce whether or not the student actually does it or not. Is that?
So given the amount of time that we're providing for students to do it during school, it's harder not to complete it because they're going to be getting so much exposure in different times of the day over the next 4 months. And that exposure will come from not only their crew teacher, but their counselors and me and their supervisor. And so to kind of just go rogue and say, I'm not doing this is going to be challenging. There will be follow-up conversations with students. We do have like a retreat that's scheduled in January for like, hey, let's powwow and get you through as much of this as possible. And ultimately, anything we're proposing, given the feedback we got from IB, the district in some way has to support, because we recognize it's good for kids. A lot of good things are already happening, and we are providing the time to do it.
Okay, so thank you. So just so I'm clear, because it sounded like I'm not quite sure when they're going to have time. So it's not just going to be 30 minutes in crew.
No, and I think that might be a good opportunity to get back to the slides, because I talk a little bit more about that, the win. That's good. Thanks. Okay, so pivoting back, I alluded to this a bit, but students really can choose anything for the personal project. And that's the piece that can be challenging. And we lean on our 10th grade crew leaders to talk about the just ways that we can brainstorm and tap into students' interests. One thing new this year is, as you know, with flex being required from 2 to 3 p.m., students are going to have the option to use their flex block as their personal project. What that means is if I'm a 10th grader and I'm in guitar club and that club is building a guitar from start to finish, that 10th grader can choose to use building the guitar as their personal project. That would be an exemplary idea as far as what the project could look like. There's multiple other flex blocks where there's something they could produce, even if it's just improving. There's a kickball club, even if it's improving like the different, how many bases does a student run based on their kick. That's all something that can be turned into a project. So this is another way for students to be able to say, hey, I'm doing this, and here's how it can be my personal project as well.
Molly, just to confirm, somebody in the chat asked about APUSH already using FlexBlock, and that's because they use it for NHD, National History Day projects, and the National History Day project would count as a personal project, correct?
Yes, it would. And in fact, I talked to Miss Davis and Mr. Konopinski, and they do have a very popular flex block. NHD takes a very similar form to the personal project, certainly with higher requirements. And the product that is produced for NHD could serve as a personal project. The only biggest thing, and something that IB had brought up to us, was we have to ensure that when it comes to the report aspect, they don't just turn in their NHD process paper for those who have students in NHD. Although it serves a very similar purpose, we have to ensure that the students are entering the prompts associated with the personal project. And so, yes, APUSH and their product, NHD, can help and service this. We're just going to have to make sure we're still hitting the project requirements. So here's some examples. I would say a very common one is shadowing someone in the community. That could be one time, that could be several times over the 4-month period that we work on this. And this was a young lady who had an interest in becoming a deputy, and she actually shadowed one here in Shaker over an ongoing time. And this young lady actually went on to pursue law enforcement. So that's one extreme example of how this experience can influence something that a student may pursue outside of the project. In the middle, that physical video game was programmed by a group of students. This was at the showcase where they were actually playing it. The young lady up top, bullet journaling, that was the example I gave before. And she went above and beyond and had a trifold, but her product was the actual journal. On the left, this is actually Miss Davis's daughter. For those who are in APUSH, she did something related to recycling. So these are some materials that students will get exposure to in their crew period. So some of these are support docs to get them to start thinking about what they enjoy and say, okay, if I enjoy this, how might that turn into a project? So if one interest or passion is cooking, a project example could be a cookbook. If one interest or passion is weightlifting, a project could be improving my bench press by X amount of weight, and so on. So this is, again, something that is not required, but it does help kind of get the juices flowing because it's such an open area of what might you do for your project. And so crew teachers push this out and encourage students in this brainstorm. Similarly, it talks a little bit more explicitly here about, okay, here's my project choice. This is what it might look like. Here's what I'm going to do to start planning it. And then I know I've said it a lot today. What ATL skills will I be developing throughout? There's an exhaustive list here. And again, really good life skills that we hope all our graduating seniors can possess. And then additional notes. We've seen the process journal, we've seen the research guide, we've seen the report outline. And oh, we actually haven't seen this. So this was created by our librarian who pushes into a lot of classes on research, but it talks a little bit about getting a variety of sources. They are only required to find 2 sources during this experience, and this guide kind of gets them in the framework that a source doesn't always have to be a web URL, but it could take many different forms. Again, not required. This guide is not required, but the research component is. This is one way to get there. Okie doke. So talking a little bit about the win. So the supervisor model I already talked about, but I'm going to review with the slide. So students at 9:50 today indicated some interest. They also were asked if they wanted to use their flex block as their personal project. The teachers yesterday afternoon received a very similar questionnaire. What are your interests and anything else I may need to know? I then take those two lists and pair. Each supervisor will have no more than 4 students to supervise. And again, the intention is that they are paired with a small group of students who have a like passion. And those meetings will begin in November. So there will be 4 once a month beginning in November. And as we stated, we're looking at what time we'll use, because conference time, which I know has been a hot topic as of late, we only really have student conferences sacred on Wednesday and Fridays. Mondays typically are building meeting days. Tuesday and Thursday are flex and collaborative planning time meetings. Some conferences are intermixed in there. So it was really important to find something, time that could be sacred for 10th graders, where they are engaging with their supervisors. And I felt really strongly, and I know teachers and students do, and maybe all of you, that we don't take a conference time because we know that our students need support and we want to be available to them. So I did not want to touch Wednesday or Fridays. This model is something we brought back this year. It kind of dissolved during COVID, and then we were able to go through the project process kind of without it. And we need to bring it back only because we really find that the smaller group connection of a supervisor asking and engaging with the student on their project has been helpful for completion. Ian, do you have a question?
Am I on? Yes. 2 things. My child did participate in this 4 years ago before COVID, and it was optional, and she loved it. It was great. It was sort of a fun thing.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a really positive thing. But I think it's going to be interesting of how to get it as part of the culture and part of what everybody does.
Yes.
With that, is attendance being taken for flex block? And
Yes.
will attendance be taken for this?
Yes.
Because that doesn't appear on progress book, I don't think, at all.
So personal project is not in Power School. Flex block, for those who don't know, is required this year. There is an attendance component until 3 p.m. Where that you have to toggle for that on Power School is not as obvious as where their regular attendance is. Honestly, I am not the Power School person for Flex Block as far as attendance is concerned. But if you specifically are needing some kind of screencastify, I'm happy to advocate for that on your behalf. Feel free to send me an email. And if and hopefully when the supervisor meeting occurs during Flex Block, there will be attendance taken, just as there would be, because we have to show that we're providing instructional time until 3 p.m. So we will be taking attendance. If the meeting starts from 3 to 4, I'm going to still encourage that we take attendance, because I would like to see who's coming, who's not. How can we reach those who may not be? Thank you. Tangibles, we talked a bit about this. I feel like particularly Shaker students have so much going on. There are so many programs. There's extracurriculars, there's theater, there's music, there's sports, there's very rigorous academics, and they sometimes don't have the time to do what they really enjoy. There's examples from a project in the past of a student who literally would read for pleasure every single day, and then realized that she had to just be reading for her classes every single day. And so her personal project was actually beginning a book club and getting back to her roots and her passions in that. And so I always say it kind of gets them back into something that they like, or it's completely new and they're like, hey, this sounds cool, I want to try it out. This is the time. We talked a little bit about this, but really the skill development is the takeaway here. Can't iterate that enough. So when is this happening? We mentioned it, but it will happen from a material standpoint in 10th grade crew. It will happen at least once a month, but mostly twice a month, beginning as early as today. And then the supervisor meetings happen once a month. Now those are an hour and crew is 30 minutes. So you're looking at least probably 2 hours a month that we're providing in school. And even more so if the student decides that they want to do their flex block as their personal project. Additionally, we will be offering a retreat where they pretty much, students can enter not having started and leave really on a good path to finishing on time. And so that will be at the end of January after our third quarter gets started. And then just generally, I plan to be tracking as much as I can student progress so that I can pull students when needed, have a little powwow, what can I do to support you, general support sessions, and so on. This exhibition of learning, I believe this date is on the district calendar, and it tends to be fluid every year just based on how things fall. That specific date is before spring break. If we need to push it till after, we will, but it will be something that the community will be invited to come see. It'll probably be around 6 p.m. one night. Very fluid model, just come in and hear what students did. So this resource bank is where the one-stop shop for students, and that's where material will be pushed out. It also means that all 10th graders are on the same classroom. All 10th grade crew leaders will be the teachers on the classroom, and I will be on there as a teacher as well, being able to kind of track progress over time with different turn-ins and whatnot. So it does help just to have it in one spot to see what students need additional support, which students are well on their way. And it's always going to be where students can find the support material as well. So if you have questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer some now. We also have another session tonight at 7 p.m. And so if there's any FAQs, I plan to add it to the parent letter that we have currently in draft form. I did want to wait until after these Zoom sessions to ensure that any questions that come up get added to that. But that letter will go to all 10th grade guardians. And the intention is to provide an overview, talk a little bit about the skill development over time and when this is all happening. And that was one goal I had for the project this year, was to just be more explicit with the community on what it means, what it is, and when it's happening, and what you might be able to do just from a cheerleading standpoint at home. And students really can start and finish their entire project during the time that we give them at school. So I don't want you to see as adding this to your list as a parent or guardian that this is yet again something that you have to do or help with. You're certainly welcome to, and we provide the time to ensure that they can satisfy it at school.
Molly, to address a couple of the lingering questions on the chat.
Yep.
There's one question that if they haven't been here for the full middle years program, they say they moved here in 7th grade, now they're in 10th grade, they still do this thing, right? It's for all 10th graders regardless?
Yes, all 10th graders, and they are not at a deficit of not having begun MYP in grade 5. like I said, those skills are ongoing year after year. And so the hope is that they still were able to develop some sense of them throughout since 7th grade.
And then there was another question that you may not want to answer yet, but it was
Okay.
with will the teacher support piece be affected by the new policy about cutting back on after-school support for students on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And I will say before you answer that I spoke a bit with Mr. Julie about this yesterday, and he suggested to me that there is some miscommunication about whether this was a change of policy at all, what the policy is, that he intends to communicate with the community at large. So I don't know if you wanted to address that, or you would rather wait till he does that on this issue.
I can weigh in a bit. This is something that John and I talked about as well. So I think I agree with Eric. There's been some miscommunication. Flex block does occur on Tuesday and Thursday, and then after that, teacher meetings happen. There have been fluid conferences happening during that time. We know that conferences happen Wednesdays and Fridays, and we recognize that students need support. And last year, conferences did not happen Tuesdays and Thursdays, at least not in the books. And so there's nothing really new. The difference this year is that flex block is required till 3, and that 95% of them are finished at 3 o'clock. And so last year we had like an A block and a B block for each day. So like on a Tuesday, flex block A was from 2 to 3, and then flex block B was from 3 to 4. There were probably 50 offerings in each block, right? This year, they're all from 2 to 3, except like maybe 3 of them in the whole building. And so I think where there's confusion is that last year that meant that teachers were not all available at the same time, because they could be leading flex block A, they could be leading flex block B, they could be leading both. And so meeting time for them, which is required to ensure that everyone's aligned in their learning and teaching, and so students are getting an equitable experience. Collaborative time for them last year almost didn't exist, just because no one was available all at the same time. This year, all teachers are available from 3 to 4. And so it has become more of a sacred time for them to sit down and collaboratively plan. What that has led to inevitably is teachers being unavailable for conference time on Tuesday and Thursday. That is generally the sense that I'm getting just based on different conversations. I know Eric is pushing out communication. I'm excited things will be cleared up a bit, but that's kind of the shift from last year to this year. And I mean, no one would argue that additional conference time is helpful. And so what form that may take, particularly in math and Lang and Lit, tested high stakes areas, we hear it loud and clear, and teachers are like, please, like, all I want to do is meet with students, right? And so just know that it is being talked about at length. And additionally, next year, I mean, we just took a staff survey, and it's going to go to students as well, on like what schedule makes the most sense. And so we've all been weighing in on that. What does that mean for flex and crew? What's the frequency? What does that mean for our collaborative meetings? What does that mean for our staff meetings? And so I anticipate a completely new schedule next year. What it looks like, I don't know. And I know that the priorities are going to be always to be able to have sacred time that allows students to get additional support. In that, the personal project meetings would not, that was my biggest thing. They will not touch conference. They can't. I mean, I'm on a teacher contract in this role, although I'm not as student facing, and I still know, I remember how important conferences were. I will not touch them. I just won't. And so that's where the proposal came in, that if this is something that's happening, then when, and it won't be Wednesday and Friday conferences.
I just want to jump in and say, I think it seems like it's a constant improvement and trying to work towards better. And I certainly don't have the answers, but it was crickets last year at 2:00. Nobody was on campus. So
Right.
the fact that we actually have kids in school doing things is an improvement. I think there's room for growth.
Sure, always.
But not having kids there from 2 to 3 is not a good.
Yeah, it was a detriment. And that was a non-negotiable this year. We still want to do flex. We have to make it till 3:00, and it has to be almost considered another class. The way that it's physically sectioned in Power School is different, but students are rostered to a class and attendance is taken. And that's something we didn't have. And I think the argument was, it's new, it's a pilot, let's see which students are fully engaged and which aren't, and then adapt accordingly. But ultimately, a release at 2:00 is not even sound with the state. So.
And is there anything on the table about having an additional class?
Yes, that is on the table.
Yay.
Yep. I can open the chat now too, Sue.
Yeah, I think that addresses them, other than lots of people saying thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just making sure. I think I covered them. I think you're right. Okay, perfect. I'll stay on. Feel free, sign off if you're satisfied. I will be available. And thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming.